麥拿倫啱啱接受咗 The Race 一個好深入嘅 podcast， 我覺得對了解麥拿倫車隊以至今年嘅戰況都好有幫助，所以整合咗啲精華翻譯俾大家睇。如果對完整版有興趣，可以去 The Race 個 YouTube， 條 link 我亦都放咗喺 description。另外，如果你都中意 F1 相關嘅 topic， 我個 channel 入邊有唔同嘅分析講解嘅影片，歡迎訂閱。而家即刻入正題。Lando Norris 講返佢同工程師 Will Joseph 合作咗咁多年，由佢第一次踏上 F1 開始，兩個人就一齊成長，互相學習。佢哋之間嘅了解同埋默契，已經成為咗 Lando 成個職業生涯入邊最重要嘅支柱之一。
It would be a shame if I said anything but very, right? So, it's been very, very important to me since what 2018, yeah. Since one of my first tests ever in Formula One in Budapest. So it's been quite a journey together. But I think we've both been on it together. He's helped me a lot, kind of, with the introduction of Formula One and getting up to speed. But every weekend there's always something new. There's something extra to learn from one another. And I think it's one of the most important relationships that you have. I mean, and I have my group around me, my trainer, my manager, that kind of group. But there's only one guy that speaks to me, and that's Will. And therefore, our understanding of each other, what we like, what we don't like, how we work together is one of the most important things.
而家比賽規模同複雜度越嚟越高，車手唔單止淨係識揸車咁簡單，仲要識得掌握策略、溝通同即時應變嘅能力。對 Lando 嚟講，點樣可以適應變化，同團隊溝通好，應付唔同情況，就係而家 F1 競爭又殘酷又精彩嘅地方。
And obviously, it's such a big picture now in Formula One, isn't it, Lando? There's so much going on. People have the idea the driver jumps in the car, it's just about going quick, but that's almost the minority part of the job, isn't it? I mean, the complexity, you seem to have been very effective at getting on top of that over the years, and I guess you never stop learning in that regard.
No, you definitely never stop, and especially this year, like the most important year. There's been more that we're learning now than almost in the past at times. So there's always things you're learning, always things you're discovering, you're trying to combat and overcome, all within a matter of a session or a weekend. But like Will said, the communication is also something that to do with strategy, to do with your approach to the weekend. That changes every single time. So you always have to be ready for whatever comes at you, whatever I might be feeling on track, whether that's more comfortable, less comfortable. You got to be ready as a team, not just me as the driver, but as a team to understand that. Is that required, or does that require setup changes or toys changes on the steering wheel, which will include more of Java stuff. So, like how you work as a team is very important, and I would say never relaxes in a sense, and at times becomes more important than ever, that how you work together, the efficiency, the quickness of developing the car through the weekend. All of these things are never, you get more accompanied with what they are and what you might want and not want, but in terms of the detail of how to go through these things, it never gets that much easier.
喺 F1 呢個極度講求細節同效率嘅環境入面，無論目標係想唔好包尾，定係爭冠軍，車手同團隊都要喺每一個細節度逼晒所有潛力出嚟。Lando 就分享咗佢透過持續自我檢討、批判性思考同埋同工程團隊夾得好，一步一步提升表現，喺困難入邊繼續成長。
In many senses, it doesn't matter if you're trying to not be last, if you're trying to be first, you're just trying to extract every last detail and every last bit from as many points as possible. My job often is not just to try and help Lando with those, but to try and help the other engineers around us to also achieve that. So it doesn't really change, but the stakes might seem higher. But like I say, we try and forget that.
It's an interesting point, because you're kind of talking about the process focus there, which is obviously the big challenge, and you've been very successful with that, Lando. But how easy is it to do that, and what's your process for it? Because obviously there's been a lot of talk about, you're very frank about what you're going through, how you judge your driving. Yeah. Some people think that's a weakness. Actually, it's quite an important part of the process in terms of improving, or you wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
So how do you see that all fitting together?
I mean, that's something that I would say I've changed over the years with. Sometimes I can be more, sometimes less critical of myself. Sometimes more and less critical of, of Will or Jarve and in a constructive way. But it's what we know is the best way of getting the most out of myself. And that's fine. I know I don't need to act like certain people want or certain people believe must be done. I act in the way that I believe is best for me to get the most performance out of myself, to get the most performance out of Will and Jarve, and they all have their own ways of doing things, So together it's then how can we get the most out of one another. But there's certainly more tense moments, There's more tense moments, and it's never always perfect. And actually this year, as well as it started, have been, I would say, some of the toughest times.
喺 F1 呢種連少少誤差都會放到好大嘅極限競爭入面 ，Lando 就係靠住佢嘅適應力、對贏車嘅執着，再加上同團隊之間好緊密嘅合作，喺不斷變化嘅環境入面堅持。雖然背後有幾多辛苦、幾多調整，外人未必睇得出，但就係佢對每個細節嘅極致追求，一直撐住佢同麥拿倫一步一步向住目標進發。
I think we are talking smaller things. I think when you're behind the wheel, everything is exaggerated. As soon as you feel like you've missed out on 300 or 400 on a corner, you feel like, I've messed it up. What a terrible corner. But that can be the difference between me being on first or being fifth nowadays. That's how close it is. So I think this year, just a number of things have changed. McLaren is the only car I've ever driven, so it's almost what I'm most used to, but it's still changed a lot over the years. We've gone from having one of the worst cars on the grid to having the best car on the grid, and that doesn't mean it's not just as simple as the car is just quicker. How you have to drive it has changed a lot over the years, and I've had to adapt every single season to a different car. It's just always been called a McLaren, and it's always been in kind of papaya and that kind of thing, but it doesn't mean it's always been the same car. It's gone through a lot of changes, which is you would have hoped to go from last to first, and that's required a lot of adaptability from me. So in the end of the day, the answer for me being quick in a McLaren has never been because it's the only car I've driven, because the McLaren from nowadays could not be even compared to the McLaren of a few years ago. So one of my strengths, I think, is that adaptability and the ability to drive kind of whatever car I got. I also think that's just my job, is to go out and drive whatever car. But then there's the compromises you make as a team. How do you get the most out of one another? How can I get the most out of the car? And how can the team give me a car that I can get the most out of? And that's where there's just been a little bit more of a struggle this season, is we made the car better, like 100%, we have the best car on the grid. But it might just be that little bit trickier for me to get those last hundredths out of. And that's just what I struggle with. But I can feel those things, and like we just touched on, I'm not happy unless I know I've kind of got everything out of it, whether that means I'm first or third or whatever it is. So this year it's been tiny things, and honestly it's very hard to put it into just the layman's terms of I'm struggling with this or that. It's just the underlying feeling that I've had with this car. Things just aren't flowing as naturally. And then when you have to drive in a manner which is a little bit less natural, even if you're adapting to things and you're trying hard to adapt to different scenarios and different way of driving, as soon as you have to maybe think in a slightly different way, that can cost you 200s, 300s, 400s. And when you're compromising things by 2, 3, 400s, that can be the difference between being on pole or third, And therefore I complain about those things, and I'm not happy with those things because I just want to be on pole and I want to get the most out of it. We want to get the most out of it. So in the end of the day, it's just my determination to win. It's just I'm not satisfied with not winning and not performing at the best. And then I'm critical of myself. I'm critical of how we work as a team. And that's why I come across the way I do. And that's why it's been a great year, but also a difficult start to the season, because things just aren't flowing as easily as what I would like. And I'm not able to get the most out of the car as what I was like. So, it's complicated. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that people just have no clue about and don't get to see. Maybe one day they get to know about it, but it's our job, Will's job, Jarve's job, my job to understand it and resurrect them as quickly as possible.
隻 Brown 講返當年啱啱入隊嗰陣，其實車隊最大問題就係冇一個有效嘅管理，再加上成個團隊入邊都缺乏信任同透明度。直到新一代管理團隊慢慢建立起嚟，麥拿倫先一步一步重建結構、重振士氣，技術實力都開始追返上嚟，令麥拿倫唔止恢復競爭力，而家仲成為一隊準備好迎戰嘅 F1 勁旅。
Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Zak Brown, CEO of McLaren. Now, Zak, you've been here now since late 2016.
Yep.
A lot of the team looks the same. There's some of the same people here, but obviously the results on track very, very different. So how much has changed? How has the team gone from where it was then to where it is now?
Everything's changed. As you mentioned, the majority of the people haven't changed. What's changed is the leadership on the racing team. They've done a wonderful job. You know, when I started in December of 16, what I walked into was worse than I anticipated. You know, it kind of all the fingers were pointed at our power unit provider at the time, and knowing that I grew up going, McLaren can do no wrong, it's like, okay, kind of makes sense to me. And
you pointed some of those fingers as well.
Yeah. And when I peeled back the onion, if you'd like, I saw there were all sorts of issues going on here that all really kind of stem from a lack of leadership. Our commercial department wasn't where it needed to be a lot because the results were very weak. The morale of the team wasn't where it needed to be. There was little transparency, little trust, and it wasn't kind of any one particular person's fault because, of course, we had issues going on at the most senior level in the ownership. So I always kind of just say there wasn't enough adult supervision on the racing team. And when you look back at when it started to go wrong was kind of coming out of 2012. Obviously, Lewis saw what was coming, made the change, and kind of lost our way since then. Andrea Stella and his team have done an amazing job. My leadership team, Laura in finance, Daniel in HR, my commercial team, Louise, Nick, Matt, Alessandra just joined us, our communications team, because everything feeds into the performance of the race car. You know, you need to have great sponsors to fund the technology. You get great sponsors because you have great fans that are engaged with because your communications department, et cetera, et cetera. And so getting everyone rowing the same direction, rebuilding that trust, that belief. And it was a few key people that just provided great leadership for the, you know, we have 1,400 people here at McLaren across our different forms of racing series, and things couldn't be better, but they're as tough as ever.
麥拿倫由谷底走返上嚟，其實經歷咗一段好長時間嘅重建同轉變，就係2019年嗰班核心班底打好咗而家成績嘅根基，而 Andrea Stella 出嚟帶隊之後，佢嘅領導力就成為咗近年成功嘅關鍵。Zak Brown 講返成個過程都好肯定，當初揀 Stella 係一個好重要嘅決定，因為就係呢個決定，麥拿倫先可以再一次變成一隊有實力嘅頂級車隊。
Race-winning operation that we see now, so that seemed to be a clear sequence that needed to be gone through.
I think that's accurate. I think we were so behind on infrastructure that you needed to kind of get the basics right. You know, we had a wind tunnel that we weren't using here on site, or, you know, everything was kind of outdated from a technology point of view. So I think that era, if you'd like, helped modernize the technology, and then it needed that final level of racer instinct and hard work and morale and leadership, and I think that's what Andrea brought to the table. You know, when we won in 21, that was a pretty good season for us. That was really our 2019 team. Pete Padromo, Andrea Stella, Gilles de Ferrin, Pat Fry did a wonderful job, because our 21 car was our 20 car because of COVID. The only difference was we changed engine providers. And our 20 car, of course, was designed in 2019. So come 2021, I think everyone kind of thought, wow, this team's doing fantastic. And credit to them for sure, but it was actually our 2019 team. So if you think about who got us back on track in 2023, was a lot of our 2019 team, because in 20 and 21, some of those people weren't in the leadership positions. They were when they got the keys to the car, if you'd like, and gave us a wonderful car from Austria onwards.
And obviously Andrea Stella has been a key part of this. I must admit, when he was appointed, I kind of saw him as a continuity candidate. I've got a lot of time for Andrea Stella, obviously a great engineer, but I slightly underestimated perhaps the slight cultural shift that he brought. Did you expect that when you appointed him? Did you think, oh, he's just a logical one, or did you think, oh no, actually this is the guy who will inject McLaren with what it needs?
He's an unbelievable communicator. He communicates very well. He listens very well. He has a great technical understanding. He leads by example. He's a workaholic, but he's very calm. So he's done such a great job of getting politics out of the team, not letting politics into the team, building trust. And so, yeah, I think some people were like, oh, I'm not so sure. I was pretty close to positive.
麥拿倫一直都好有計劃咁去栽培 Lando Norris 同埋 Piastri 呢兩位超有潛力嘅車手，目標就係打造一隊又後生又夠競爭力嘅陣容。即使未來喺賽場上難免會有啲激烈交鋒，車隊早就有心理準備，亦都相信佢哋可以喺激戰過後依然保持尊重同團結。呢種互補又平衡嘅氣氛，正正就係麥拿倫能夠繼續一齊向前進步嘅重要關鍵。
Yeah, no, it was very deliberate. Obviously, Lando we brought up through the ranks, and then Oscar we identified as kind of the next Lando, if you'd like, and they kind of dropped the ball there. Thank you, Upmar, and then was able to bring Oscar on board, and he's done a fantastic job. We have two unbelievably competitive drivers. I know everyone's kind of waiting for the big moment. I think that moment will come when they're racing each other very hard and someone gets it a little bit wrong, but I'm not worried about the outcome because we've discussed it. We know it's more of a when than an if, and I think drivers can race each other very hard and very clean, and every once in a while, someone's going to get it wrong. If you have two cars next to each other 24 times a year, it's going to happen, but I think we have a relationship with our drivers, the drivers with each other, that they can have an epic battle on track and shake hands at the end of it, even if it means there's a little tangling in between. So wouldn't have a different driver lineup as I look up and down the grid. They're great guys. They're team players. They're great in the garage. They get along well. They push each other very well. So very happy with our driver lineup.
由一個新仔同佢工程師之間嘅默契開始，到而家喺呢個又殘酷又複雜嘅 F1 入邊 ，Lando 同麥拿倫一齊捱過無數次挑戰，每分每秒都堅持極限推進，唔放過任何細節。背後其實係一場團隊信任重建、領導層改革，再加上新一代車手互相推進、互相進步嘅歷程。麥拿倫用行動話俾大家知，贏唔係靠運氣，而係無數細節加埋得出嘅成果，係由谷底一步一步上嚟嘅決心。而家呢一段旅程先啱啱開始，